Hello world, and we are back. My name's Kyle Fischl, and this is going to be episode 93 of my poker vlog. For this episode, I play at Orange City Racing and Card Club, my usual stomping grounds, and I have a lot of hands to go over, so I'm going to get right into it. Alright, first hand of note. An early position player raises to $20. There are two middle position callers. The button calls. I'm in the big blind with King Deuce of Hearts. For only 15 to win about 100, I'm definitely going to tag along with a suited king. So we are 5 ways to a flop of King Queen 5 Rainbow. Pretty happy, all things considered, flopping top pair. As I'm first to act, I'm definitely just going to play in flow and check to the pre-flop aggressor. The pre-flop aggressor bets $35. When it folds to me, I'm pretty happy to make the call. Top pair, my opponent could easily be value betting just a single queen, maybe ace-jack sometimes. Could have the best hand here. We're definitely not going to fold for $35. When the turn is the 5 of hearts, it's pretty much one of the best cards I could ever hope for. Not only because it gives me a backdoor flush draw, but it also kind of eliminates my kicker problems completely. Unless my opponent has exactly ace king or king queen, I'm chopping with all of their kings. So it's definitely one of the above average cards for me. When I checked my opponent this time, he bets $75. Very happy to call once again. When the river's the 3 of hearts, and I backdoor a super ridiculous flush.
Outstanding!
This is a spot where I don't think checking to my opponent's a good idea. If he has a single king or single queen, I don't think he goes for 3 streets all too often. I definitely don't want to give him the chance to check through when he clearly has something, and I should have the best hand here most of the time. So I lead into him for $160. After about a minute tank, my opponent eventually makes the call and is very unhappy to see my hand, especially when he shows ace 5 of diamonds. So starting out pretty good in this session. Next interesting hand. With one limp to me, I'm in middle position with ace queen offsuit. I raise to $20. The button calls, the big blind calls, and the limper calls as well. So we're going 4 ways to a flop of queen, queen 3, 2 hearts. Obviously smash this board, very happy with my hand.
Are you seeing this? Are you seeing this?
And we're never going to not bet, as all worst queens will pay me off and the flush draws will pay me off as well. So on the flop, I decide on a $30 C-bet. Only the big blind makes the call, so we are heads up to a turn card, which is the 8 of spades. Definitely a safe card. I don't expect my opponent to have queen 8 too often. Additionally, this opponent is extremely tight, like probably the tightest player at the table. So I'm pretty confident that this particular person doesn't even have a flush draw and likely has king, queen, queen, jack. With his level of tightness, I don't even think he could have queen 10 all too often. But the other 2 combinations of coolers will likely give me a large payday on this hand. So with that in mind, the second barrel on this hand is going to be $80. My opponent decides to call pretty quickly. On the river 4 of spades, obviously nothing to really worry about. It's a very clean board, very good run out. Ace queen is going to be best all day. When my opponent checks to me, for this third barrel, I'm hoping he can pay me off $180. So that's what I decide to bet. Well, my opponent decides to check raise this river to $550. Not too big of a check raise.
Raise.
How much is that?
$550 total.
I don't really think there are any bluffs that are really possible from him in this spot. I'm also not sure what exact hands he would choose to check raise river with, as I've already bet 2 streets. I don't think there's a whole lot of indication that I would bet the 3rd street. Regardless of his sizing, regardless of a check raise line, my hand's just simply too strong to fold on this board. Still be king, queen, king, jack. That would play the same way. I call. So I make a pretty standard call. However, we do not beat pocket 8s. So it was a pretty good turn card for my opponent. And that one feels like I just got knocked out. We had to rebuy, add on a little bit. We are now into the game for $1,500. Definitely not the direction we are going for in this game. But luckily, shortly after that, in the big blind, I'm able to get 3 streets of value on a limped pot, along with a $225 river bet getting paid off with 10-7 suited. So that one will help us out.
I can fix it. I don't want you to fix it. I can heal you.
Before the next interesting hand, with an under the gun limp, there's a second limp. A middle position player raises to $20. I'm in the cutoff with ace-8 offsuit. Could squeeze this one, but I think an ace is good enough to play, especially at this table when people are playing pretty wide ranges. So I make the call. One of the blinds calls, all the limpers calls, so we are going 5 ways to a flop of ace-6-3. On this board, it checks all the way to me, and with an ace, no kicker, I think I could bet really small.
Why would we do that?
Simply just to thin the field and deny equity from players who may have like 7-5 and pocket 10s and things like that I get to either fold or pay me off drawing relatively thin. So I start with a $25 bet. Well, 3 players call, so we're 4 ways to a turn card. Just the 7 of diamonds. 4, 5, and 6, 7 get there, but besides that, there are plenty of random hands that could have just peeled one and not improved. So when it checks to me, I'm definitely going to put out a second barrel. Small again, as I'm not trying to price out all the worst hands, as all better aces are calling my bet anyway, and 2 pairs will as well, but I do want hands like 7-5 and 6-4 and things like that to be able to continue. With betting the second time, it gives me the betting lead to be able to check back dicey rivers. On this turn card, I bet $60. To this bet, 2 opponents decide to fold, but 1 middle position player decides to make the call a second time. When the river's the jack of diamonds, doesn't complete any straights or any real 2-pair combinations, but thinking my hand is definitely too weak to go for 3 streets, when he checks to me, I happily check this one back, go to showdown, and we are against 5-3 of clubs, and we can definitely beat that one, so we're happy with how this hand turned out. Next hand of note. With 2 limps, a middle position player who is very short stacked goes all in for $88. I am in the cutoff with ace-9 of spades. I'd say it's pretty close, but with a few limps of dead money, the blinds behind, and only $88, I think a suited ace is definitely good enough to make this call. Especially with the World Series coming up, gotta be willing to play some flips, so I make the call. On the Jack-9 4 board, very good for me. I beat all small pocket pairs now. On the turn 9, I beat nearly all pocket pairs now.
Dude, how did you do that?
So that's nice. Deuce River, I just announced ace-9 and my opponent mucks. So that was a fun flip that went in my favor. Next hand of note. I button straddle to $10. The blinds fold. An early position player raises to $20. There's 1 caller. And me with ace-jack offsuit, a min raise is not going to be good enough. I 3-bet to $80. Happy to thin the field or play a bigger pot in position with a strong hand. Well, both players decide to call, so we are going 3 ways to a flop of ace-king-king, 2 clubs. On this board, the early position player leads for $40, and the middle position player decides to call. Normally, I would say pre-flop aggressor donk leads are weak, and they're often straight draw flush draws trying to name their own price. In general, I'd raise this board a lot of the time, but in this particular dynamic, I think that this lead could also be like king 10 and just wanting to make sure it doesn't check through and things such as that, especially with the middle position caller who would likely just call with a king and not need to raise if he had trips and most of the board locked up. So for these reasons, I choose to just call this street and reevaluate the turn. So we are 3 ways to a turn, which is the 6 of spades. On this turn card, the pre-flop aggressor and donk leader decides to check. The middle position player does not pick up the betting lead, he checks as well. When it checks to me, I think my opponents are pretty much more weighted to like queen jack and 10-9 of clubs and things such as that, so not gonna let them see a river card for free. I think I'm either very far ahead or very far behind on this river, so I don't think I need to bet too big anyway, but I decide on a $125 wager, and for this price, both opponents decide to fold. So we scoop another medium-sized pot, and the session is going in the right direction again. Next hand of note. I am in middle position with queen jack of diamonds. I raise to $20. It folds all the way to the big blind, who raises to $40. I'd say this opponent's relatively tight, so in general, most 3-bets should be preceded with caution, but when it's just a min raise, I literally can't fold for $20. So we are heads up to a flop of queen jack 9, 1 diamond. Well, I sure hope my opponent has ace queen, ace jack, pocket kings, pocket aces. Any of that's probably gonna continue and likely be able to get stacks in by the river. However, the big blind decides to check now. When he checks, I have to put him closer to like 8, 7, 6s, you know, min 3 bet because he had a pocket pair and it's just not the board he's looking for. So thinking he's pretty weak and would definitely need to catch up or possibly throw out a bluff attempt, I decide to check back this flop.
Why would you do that?
Because it is a very sensible thing to do.
When the turn is the 4 of diamonds, my opponent checks to me a second time. At this point, I can't wait forever for him to throw out money. I have to eventually build my own pot.
I will take care of this myself.
Especially gaining backdoor diamonds in case for some reason my opponent flopped a set or exactly king 10. So I wager $50. To this bet, my opponent min raises me to 100, which is kind of weird as he only has about 270 in his stack total. So no need to get fancy. Let's just get it all in right now if you have something that you can raise with. So I put them all in. He snap calls. I announce that I have 2 pair, and on the river I announce I have a flush, which both are good against pocket aces. So always a good feeling to crack aces, even better when it's a decent sized pot. Next hand of note. An early position player raised to $20. There are 2 callers before I'm in the small blind with pocket kings. Time to put in a very standard 3-bet. I choose the sizing of $115. Definitely want to thin the field and price out all medium suited connectors and random unconnected holdings so that it's easier to identify my opponent's ranges post-flop. Well, the big blind decides to cold call, and this player is an extremely competent player, so definitely have some alarm bells ringing at this point, and that action entices one of the other opponents to call as well. So we are going 3 ways to a flop of 8-7-5 rainbow. Honestly, not the greatest board. I do think that the big blind cold call could include things like 9-10 suited and 7-8 at some frequency. And even if his specific hand did not, he laid a pretty good price for the middle position player to call. So on this board, not the greatest scenario, but it's not going to make me slow down from c-betting. I down bet to $75. The big blind decides to call, but luckily the middle position player decides to fold, so heads up to a turn card, which is the 10 of hearts. Now I do think that completes some 2-pair possibilities. I think 8-10 isn't impossible. I also think that pocket 10s is pretty credible for my opponent. So on this card, I'm going to go for a bit of pot control and just try to check call all the way down to get to the river as cheaply as possible. So expecting my opponent to bet pretty heavily on this turn at a high frequency.
What are you doing?
I check to him.
You are making us look bad. No, I am not.
But when he checks it back, I feel much better about my hand. And the river board pairing 7 is also pretty good for me. If he happened to have 8-10, I'll take a strong counterfeit on this one. I do beat like ace-10, which may check back sometimes. I beat jacks, queens. Maybe 9-10 doesn't feel too confident throwing out a c-bet on the turn as I'm repping pretty strong. So there are plenty of hands that can pay off a smaller size river bet. So with that in mind, I bet $150. However, my opponent decides to fold, so no additional value on the river, but we will take a decent sized pot again. Some consistent success is helping us get out of the hole on this session. Next hand of note. I button straddle to $10. The small blind decides to raise to $30. One early position player decides to call, and I'm definitely not going to fold a medium pocket pair for $20 when I get to play it in position, so I make the call as well. We are 3 ways to a flop of king 9-3. 2 diamonds. The small blind c-bets for $50. Against this specific opponent, I think he's weighted much more to like ace-jack, ace-queen, hands of that nature than actually having a king here. He is an opponent that definitely has the ability to throw out one or multiple barrels on a bluff. So especially with position, I'm definitely going to call this time and reevaluate turn. When the turn is the 3 of spades, it's pretty much one of the best cards I could hope for. Doesn't complete any flush draws, any straight draws. Doesn't improve any hands on the flop besides maybe ace-x of spades. And on this card, my opponent checks to me. I do think this scenario is a pretty standard ace X, 1C bet on a king high board type situation. So thinking I have the best hand, and a lot of the times a larger size bet would just get an ace X to fold, I decide to turn my hand into a bluff and bet $110. Luckily, if called, I will still have the betting lead on the river and can decide if I want to pull the trigger again or take my showdown value. But to this bet, my opponent decides to call. Not super comfortable with the development that's happening. And when the river is the queen of hearts, it's also a pretty gross card because my opponent could easily have ace queen of diamonds. My opponent checks to me. The queen completes a lot of hands, even like queen jack of diamonds that would just check call turn and have enough showdown value to beat me. I think for approximately 30 to 45 seconds about if I'm going to turn my hand to a bluff to try to get exactly a queen to fold. But eventually I decide that my opponent's likely going to just side call rivering his showdown value as well. So I just check it back, kind of giving up. I get the most beautiful words ever from my opponent. He says ace high. I show my sevens. They are good, and we take another decent sized pot down. And a final hand of note. With 3 limps, I'm on the button straddling to $10 with pocket queens. A limp is not going to be enough for this hand. I raise to $50. Well, 2 of the limpers call and 1 of them folds. So we are 3 ways to a flop of jack, 7, deuce. 2 clubs. When it checks to me, as there are no overcards, I think it's a pretty easy 1/3 size pot C bet. I bet $50. The small blind is the only caller. When the turn is the jack of spades, it is pretty bad. I expect my opponent to call with a jack a lot of the time. So on the top card board pairing turn, I'm definitely going to go to some pot control when checked to me. Don't think there's too many other hands I can get value from at this point. So I check this one back. When the river's the 3 of diamonds, my opponent does an odd move. He leads for $10. Now, this opponent is very, very good. I believe he could be doing this with literally ace high and be going for the thinnest of value. I don't see him ever doing it with a jack. You bet a normal 100, 150 size bet with this. So I'm pretty confident I have the best hand when facing this lead. Definitely feels more like a blocker bet. So I'm going to raise this one, hopefully get value from ace highs or maybe even a random 7. So I raise to $100. And my opponent calls very quickly and queens are good. So happy to get a little bit extra by not simply calling the river blocker bet. So in this 2-5 session, we are into the game for 1,500. We are out of the game for 23.28. After 8 hours, that equates to $103 an hour or 20 big blinds an hour. If you have watched all the way to this point, thank you. I appreciate it. Please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. It helps me out, and there'll be more to come next week.